Rime of the Frostmaiden, Chapter 5, Auril's Abode. This adventure begins when the player characters are roughly 7th level. Of course, they might reach 8th or even 9th level in some circumstances when they come here, assuming they've done everything in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 for this campaign. But they may also have done some side treks, such as if they did the adventure Prisoner 13 from Keys from the Golden Vault, which, as you can see here, takes place at Revel's End. Essentially, a secondary adventure at Revel's End, as there is an adventure that takes place there in this campaign. But the DM might add additional material no matter what, so they could be higher level. Nonetheless, they should be at least 7th. Player characters will come here after meeting Valen Harpel, a member of the Arcane Brotherhood, who invites her to go there with her. They will likely get to the island via Anjajuke's bell. And you can see Anjajuke here is a intelligent, talking, awakened sperm whale with this contraption on its back that's sort of like a bubble. Here's a standard party of adventurers who are being transported by Anjajuk from one of the locations from Chapter 2, Anjajuk's Bell, to the Isle of Solstice, and eventually to Castle Grimskalle, which you can see here, which might remind you, some people at least, of another castle shaped like a skull. Now, as we go into the adventure, the player characters are basically crossing the Sea of Moving Ice. This particular location, Solstice and Grimskalle, were built by frost giants and mostly abandoned, but they exist partially because of the Frostmaiden. There are some traces of the Frostmaidens, well, the Frostmaiden, but the traces of the frost giants who built it still on the island. Now, the player characters can also get there via ship from Revel's End if they want to take a ship to the island. The adventure also suggests they could take griffins to get there, or there are other means. The most likely location is using Anjajuk. Now, as they get to the island, there is an intro of what it looks like as they arrive. Feel free to use this description. I would personally. Here's the island itself as you are arriving. This is the DM map, so you can see some of the different locations. These are all shipwrecks, mostly, and many ships have tried to arrive. Most have just run aground or been destroyed. I suggest using at least one of the shipwrecks as an adventure location. Perhaps having the player characters come across it and explore it a little bit. And there are some information about the different creatures that could be in one of the shipwrecks or what the player characters might find there, but I wouldn't use more than, say, one or two of them as they might get a bit redundant. There are other locations on the island other than Grimskalle that might be worth exploring, including a Yeti cave. Likely, there might be some frost giant skeletons roaming around, or perhaps some other creatures. Even some creatures that might not be in the adventure, like, say, a frost elemental, a creature that I feel like should have been brought into this campaign and would have fit nicely, or a white pudding, which is essentially a black pudding, but it is immune to cold damage and is white and lives in frosty areas. It's a creature from an older edition of D&D that fits this area, this whole setting very nicely. Now, there is a ruined dock the player characters can try to get to if they are going via boat, or if Anjajuk brings them there. There is a ice method there when they go there. Here's the table for the player characters are exploring the shipwrecks. Now, you might get a group of player characters that are literally wanting to explore everything, and they might go from shipwreck to shipwreck, and they want to do that. They can do that. It just might get a bit redundant. There's also Nas Lantomir, who is a member of the Arcane Brotherhood and is essentially just dead. He died after arriving on the island via a Luskan ship and a pirate ship, essentially. And he has Valen Harpel's Professor Orb, her magical orb, He died on a slope overlooking the shipwreck. This is his familiar, his weasel, who in the adventure is still alive and roaming around the area, ignoring the cold, apparently. Now, this is the Professor orb right here, his hand sticking out of the snow. I kind of feel like it looks like a beholder's eye stalk a little bit. The player characters might come across him. He is location 13 on the map here. In fact, let's find it for everyone. It is over here. It's not 100% likely they will come across it. The player characters might just arrive at location 11, which is where the dock is, and wander through the snow, and maybe they go a mostly direct route to Grimskalle. Now, they might go to other locations as well. I would recommend suggesting that. In fact, if you look at the player's map of the island, you see that there isn't necessarily a trail that they can follow. They will have the ability to see the castle in the center, and obviously that's the main location. But have them come across a few things on the way just to let them know that there are other things here on the island as well. Now, as you go further in here, again, you get what could be in the shipwrecks. You get, again, Nas Lentomir, who his corpse might be worth finding, especially if the player characters are looking for him for some reason. His ghost is haunting the area and may appear at some point or another. And you might have a couple of items on him, plus his weasel. There are some ice statues around the island that have been created by the Frostmaiden. Apparently, she's very artistic when it comes to these things. There's also an abominable Yeti in the area that might be in the area to attack the player characters, which would make a good random encounter on the island. There's also a Yeti cave, as I mentioned, and something called the Garden of Death, which there is an ice troll there. There's the ice statues, which are really kind of creepy, but it adds a lot of mood to this part of the adventure. Finally, we get to Grimskalle, which again might resemble another skull shaped castle from people might remember from another source. And it does give you some great information about the size of the building, how high the ceilings are, as this was built by frost giants. The stairs, for example, are 4 feet tall, so it's difficult terrain for anyone who's not a huge creature. And the ceilings are 30 feet tall. The doors are 25 feet high and made of ice. I like that they gave these details because, for example, these doors cannot be opened by a mage hand spell. And I know player characters will try that a lot of the times. They're just too heavy. There's also some other additional factors on the island, by the way, such as if the player characters want to use hit dice on the island, it doesn't work right. They only get the bonus from their constitution modifier instead of their hit dice. The player characters don't know this until they try doing this, and when they do, after they've chosen how many hit dice they want to use, inform them that they only get their constitution bonus due to the bitter cold. Player characters might get annoyed by this, but it should show them that this is a very, very dangerous area and it will not be a cakewalk at all. In addition, the DCs for dealing with extreme cold, especially without cold weather gear, is 15 instead of 10, and there's fog all over the place around the island. Now, here we have Grimskalle itself as the player characters arrive. Again, the right map is the player map and the various entrances and exits and all that. Let me see if I have it open here. Let me just open it actually for you guys. So they come in on this little slope, they go into the bottom level, they check out a few of these rooms. Upstairs, and I will go into more detail with it, this area over here, the palace level, is where the player characters will likely encounter Auril. Her rock is up on this in the nest at the top. The bottom level has to do with finding the Codicil of White, which is the main reason the player characters came here, other than to just confront the Frostmaiden. But it's to do that, the player characters will have to pass 4 tests that the Frostmaiden has devised. Now, as you go into locations, some of these are just basic locations, the guard room for giants at least. One location in the entrance, there is a frost giant elder named Urtgard. He's very old, he's kind of slow, he's deaf, he can't take reactions. He's really an NPC, but he's a frost giant, so some player characters might still attack him. He's probably not worth as much XP as a normal Frost Giant, as he's basically half the challenge at least. But he's got some great information if the player characters can get information out of him. He might not even fight to the death. If the player characters bloody him, he might just collapse on the ground and beg for mercy. He also has some treasure with him as well, such as an alchemy jug, which is probably how he's been surviving this whole time, his food source. But he's, again, great information that the Codicil of White is in the vault downstairs, that Auril is sometimes attended by frost druids, which I'll note when the adventures suggest at 7th level that the frost giant druids are not here when the player characters get here. But if the DM needs to up the ante a little bit and make it a little more challenging, I suggest bringing some frost druids in, or maybe have them meeting with her when the player characters encounter her. It will also learn about Iskra, her rock, although the player characters may have already figured this out, that her rock has something to do with her casting the everlasting rhyme, as that's how she gets up in the air to be able to cast that spell. There's some basic rooms here as well, a kitchen and feast hall. These are all sized for giants, of course. Some mephits, ice mephits, of course. There is an actual throne room with some piercers in it. These are, standard rooms you'll find in many castle-like environments, but they work here because they need to be here. Now, there's of course the queen's bedroom. This is more or less where the Frostmaiden has been living, although she has really no need for earthly comforts or anything, and she doesn't really keep a lot of any real treasure on her. Although I would recommend the DM make one slight adjustment and maybe give her an item to allow her to escape the area more easily, such as a helm of teleportation or maybe a ring with a spell that'll allow her to escape once she hits her second form, and which we will get to shortly. There is also the crowned rooftop. This is again where the player characters fight or should fight. The rock, my group, for example, figured out the rock was up there. They could hear it and decided to deal with the rock ahead of time by finding a way to kill it first, so the Frost Maiden might not be able to get away. Now, going to Auril the Frostmaiden, if the player characters want to fight her here in the beginning, before they go into the dungeon level, they can. She will take 3 forms. Her first form is that of a giant snow, well, I guess it's just medium sized, but it seems like it should be giant. It's a snowy owlbear. I don't know why it says medium here. I seem to recall it being a large form. Owlbears are large forms, so that's kind of odd that they did that. In fact, its stats, even its hit dice, suggests that it's a large form. This might be a typo with 5e tools. Now, this is simply how they encounter her at first. Player characters don't know that she will have multiple forms. She does have legendary actions. In this form, she can teleport around. I suggest using this as often as possible, as her being very mobile is going to make this fight more difficult. Player characters are often built to be very mobile themselves, and this might not be something that they are expecting. But when this form is destroyed, she will take on her second form, which essentially looks like a woman made of ice, essentially. And you'll see that she takes on it's described as a large creature here, which makes sense. You can see the 10 hit dice that indicates a large creature correctly. And she has different abilities in this form and different legendary actions, which makes her an incredibly interesting boss creature to deal with. And obviously, everything she does has to do with ice or frost or something similar. Once this form is destroyed, she goes into her third form, which is this little ice crystal form. It's quite small, and this is when she, you break her down to this level. She's got different legendary actions again, and the ability to fly once more. And after that, if she's destroyed in this form, she dissipates until the next winter, where she could potentially reform, at least if she chooses to reform in the realms. This theoretically could be the end of the campaign, although I'll also note that Grimskalle will collapse about a minute after this form is destroyed, meaning the player characters must get out of there if that's what happens. Now, that doesn't mean they still can't get into the dungeon level to get to the Codicil of White if they kill Auril first. In fact, they might have an easier time getting down there at that point. but they'll probably still have to take the various tests that are down there. I would suggest the player characters not fight Auril until that happens. It doesn't make as much sense if they fight Auril first. The DM might even want to say that Auril is not present in these rooms when the players first come here, and maybe she arrives later. Maybe she has gone off on an errand or something, or maybe has, in her snowy owlbear form, has gone to deal with an abominable yeti or something in the area and is still on Solstice, but just not at the castle when the player characters first get there. But she does come back. That way you can prevent her from being destroyed first, which some player characters will try to go for the big boss and skip over everything else. And I would suggest avoiding that situation that way. Now, player characters can search these rooms. They can kill the rock. It might even be that she's out on her rock when the player characters get there, depending on the time of day. It would be even more dangerous if they have to deal with her and her rock at once. There's also a giant walrus that was a gift from the Frost Druids. And again, I would suggest bringing the Frost Druids in. There's even a suggestion of how to deal with an issue later in the adventure, bringing in Frost Druids to begin with. So I think it's a great thing to bring in if their player characters are at least 8th level already. They're because the adventure isn't really that difficult for a 7th level group. For the Frostmaiden in her 3 different forms is not an incredibly powerful divine being. What makes her powerful is that she has multiple forms and that she's going to come back no matter what. She's if you were to run this at higher level, for example, the Frost Maiden would be far more dangerous, like a something that a group of 14th or 15th level player characters would fight instead of 7th level players. That's one of my only criticisms of the way she's designed. I love how she has 3 forms, by the way. It is interesting. Now, I noted about having a helm of teleportation. The reason why you might want to give her that is let the player characters fight her in her force form and then enter her second. And then by the time she gets bloodied in the second, she'll realize that she's outmatched by whoever she's fighting and can then use that helm, maybe, to teleport to Yithrin or far to the east to escape from the player characters. And that dealing with her in her remaining forms might have the player characters go to Yithrin anyways. This ties Yithrin more into the overall storyline. In fact, a lot of DMs who have run Rime the Frostmaiden actually suggest a similar course of action to have her flee either on foot or via an item like that. She might have a ring of spell storing, for example, and all these items work well in the campaign. It just gives the player characters an extra reward item which again, they probably won't complain about when they get an item like that. But I would suggest using something like that, or the DM could pick something else if you feel there's a better choice item, especially if you think the player characters are just going to try to counterspell such an ability. But, anyways, have her flee if she gets too injured. She's not a fool. She's someone who will try to survive and will not fight a fight that's a losing battle if she can help it. Now, the tombs underneath the overall area. There are some frost giant skeletons down there. They are a interesting series of foes, which totally fit this campaign. So player characters are likely to fight them. There's some traps. Eventually, you get down below into the sort of bottom levels, and let me go over here as I show them on the map here. These different chambers here, and the player characters will probably break open many of these doors if they can. But the main door that leads past what I think is G11, that leads into where the Codicil of White is, cannot be opened, at least while the Frostmaiden is alive, because her divine magic is keeping it shut. That's why I said it's probably better if she's not in the actual castle when the player characters arrive, that they can't just kill her right off the bat, because that kind of breaks down what happens below Castle Grimskalle, so it doesn't make sense otherwise. So when the player characters get down here, there are 4 tests that they have to complete in order to open the door to get to the codicil. Auril knows how valuable the codicil is and only wants her followers, those who she feels fit her ideals, to be able to access it. Those ideals are cruelty, they are isolation, they're an endurance test, and they are preservation. Although the lintel above preservation doesn't, it just says ervation, which is kind of interesting little detail there. When the player characters open these doors, they will be teleported elsewhere to a small camp for some of the Regid berserkers and barbarian and Regid people out in the wilderness. Now, when this happens, they are literally teleported out there. It's not an illusion, it's not a dream. Whatever happens there happens. Her magic, as she is a deity, is what sends them there and can bring them back. Note that there is a test and a scorecard here, and player character's name should be listed here. The DM should keep track of this. And in order to pass all four tests to open the doors, at least one player character for each of the must pass at least one of the tests. It doesn't matter what order; all the players' characters could pass, but at least one character passes each in any order, then they can open the doors. If they don't do this, and again, they won't know this, then the doors cannot be opened by them. This is where the adventure says you could bring in some frost druids who have already passed some sort of test already in their own way, and they can open the doors. The other option is if the player character simply can't open it because of Auril's magic, now they can go fight Auril. This will cause, although they won't necessarily know this will cause Grimskalle to collapse, or at least the player characters might get the impression that if Auril is defeated, this magic may not hold up. This might cause, again, the top of the castle to collapse, and perhaps the vault that holds the codicil will be open to the sky, or something like that will happen. That is another way of accessing the situation if the tests don't work. Now, the first test is the test of cruelty. Essentially, the player characters arrive at a Regid camp, and there are maps for these camps that the DM can use. And as they get there, the elder basically died, or well, the elder's still alive, but if the elder died, there's an additional elder that the DM could use and all that. But the camp is out of food is the important thing. And this test is to see whether or not the player characters are cruel people. In Aurel's eyes, they should be. So someone should be cruel in the group or do something that she sees as cruel. Now, these nomads have already eaten their sled dogs. They're completely out of food. Player characters might try to just feed the camp and give them stuff. That is weakness in the eyes of the Frostmaiden. Those player characters will likely fail the test if they do that. Now, if they do not engage in acts of cruelty, say uh, they don't do what Auril wants, then they fail. One of the things that the elder wants is he wants to basically cannibalize four of his own elders and chop them up and make it into soup to feed to the other people, which is a very cruel act. If the player characters help in doing so or act cruel to any of these people, they pass. If they do nothing, Auril sees that as cruelty and they pass the test. They have to do something. Now, again, if they're compassionate, they fail the test because Auril does not see that as one of her ideals. The player characters will leave after a full hour has passed, regardless. The DM should probably not tell the player characters they will leave in an hour. Just let them be there for a while and try to figure things out. And then we move on to the next test. Eventually, the player characters will open the door for the test of endurance. And when the test begins, after the initial description, there is a figure, King Gerund. He's the Elk tribe elder, and he is moving his nomads following a reindeer herd. And he wants the player characters to help them break down his camp, which is quite easy, and then help carry the supplies through a blizzard, which Auril is creating. It's a magical blizzard. There's no way to get out of it. It has with some unusual magical properties of an anti-magic field. So trying to leave it just won't happen. And the player characters must march. And the first 8 hours should be fine. Now, if the player characters have been traveling all day after and arriving here, this will be very, very difficult. But assuming that they haven't, they can probably do the first 8 hours with no problem, but they must continue for another 6 hours. So the player characters, all of them, and plus anything they have traveling with them on foot, must also make constitution saving throws at the end of additional hours, and these DCs increase by 1 for each additional hour, or they're going to get exhaustion points. This could potentially, if they fail enough of them, or all of them, kill one of the player characters. due to the test of endurance. Auril would be fine with this because that individual is weak in her eyes. But if they can survive this test of endurance, they pass, all of them. Well, at least all the survivors. And then after an hour or so, they will teleport, more or less, back to the dungeons underneath Grimskalle. Now we get to the test of isolation, and in this case, when the players get here, they're with the Tiger Tribe, and they're going to escort Queen Bajorhild, and there's a giant great axe involved here, and she has a saber-toothed tiger, and she's keeping an eye on things as they arrive. Now, she wants them to escort her because she's planning to attack the nearby elk tribe camp in a nearby area. It's funny it says escort because the players aren't going with her. Basically, what they're doing is they're staying at the camp, and while she goes there and fights with every single person in her camp, the player character's job is to really stay behind and just watch over the camp by themselves. She will insist they don't go with her. So take that back when I said escort. That's not actually what happens here. This is not an escort quest. Their job is to stay behind. And she says she'll be back in a couple of hours, but of course, she takes a lot longer to come back. And well, she says she's going to come back in 2 days, I should say. And then she ends up being gone for, I believe, 6 days. And then for every 24 hours spent guarding the camp, and time literally passes during this time. Literally 24 hours pass, and then days pass. Player characters don't return to Grimskalle after mere moments after this begins. They come back days later after this takes place. After every check, they must make a wisdom survival as a group. Now, this DC goes up effectively every single day by 2. Now, as a group, as you can see here, it's a survival check. All player characters make it. If the party, well, each time the group fails, the party member who rolled the lowest disappears. Now, if the group passed all their checks, nobody disappears. If 2 people fail, the lowest roll disappears. The DM can break that tie with a d20 roll or something similar. Player characters don't know why that person has disappeared. That player character is essentially out of the adventure for a brief moment of time. You could have them go into a different room or somewhere else, or maybe they just, after being quiet and they don't know what's happening, they don't know where they are. You could just tell them they're lost in fog, but they can't tell this to the other player characters. As time goes on, more and more player characters may disappear mysteriously, and the player characters might try to contact them with the magic, and maybe they could try, but they're not going to get a good answer. They might say, "Oh, this wandering through the mist," or something similar, which might be kind of scary. But after 6 days and nights, Bjornhald and her survivors come back with lots of reindeer meat and all that. And any player characters who disappeared can also return with them, although they're suffering with indefinite madness determined at random. And you need the madness table from, I believe, the old DM's guide from 2014 to be able to use this. And these madness effects can be pretty rough when you use them, but they really fit this whole storyline very well here. It also suggests if player character has a Slade host as their secret that this bursts out during this time. This test of isolation reminds me a little bit of The Thing. And if you're running on a Roll20 or you want some good mood music in this case, use the music or the theme song for The Thing. It works out really well. I did that in my campaign. But that's how the player characters pass the test. They have to deal with the isolation of people disappearing more and more. Now, lastly, we get to the test of preservation or Irvation, what do you want to call it? And they go to another camp. We get to the nomads again, and essentially, this deals with the wolf tribe, specifically someone named Isar Chronomstrom, how do you want to pronounce it? And this individual is sort of a person who is blessed by Malar, the I think it's the Blood Hunter. He's the god of blood. Malar the Beast Lord. He's the god of bloodshed. There is a small child that has survived, a non-combatant named Erex, who's hiding in the snow in the area. And when the player characters arrive, there's some giant vultures, 6 of them flying around, feasting on corpses. Player characters have to do a battle here where they defeat at least some of the giant vultures, although they could take them out with ranged weapons. If two or more of the vultures are killed, the rest fly up and just fly up around the area. If you have a longbow, though, you can probably take them out anyways. Player characters can role play with this young child who survived and get some information from him. But Isar Chronid Straubs is roaming around the area. He might have wolf-like feet, more like animal characteristics. He's circling the camp, letting out terrible howls every minute or so, and he wants to destroy the young child, the only person left. And they call him the Wolf King. He's wolf-like, in some ways at least. To pass the test, the player characters basically have to kill or keep Eric's alive, the young child, so because he's essentially has the family bloodline. Now, the only way to win this test is to kill the Isar, the Wolf King, which is quite easy to figure out compared to some of the other tests. For the most part, if you're running this, the three of these tests are likely to pass no matter what happens. It's very easy in general. The only one that might be a bit of a problem is the test, not of isolation, it's the test of cruelty. I mean, if the player characters are really a bunch of goody two shoes, they're not likely to pass this test, and that might be a problem for your campaign. Nonetheless, the players only get to try each test once. If they fail, they return, no matter how much time has passed, to where they were, which means some time, being that time has passed, again, some of the frost druids might show up if they fail, or they might show up anyways. And the player characters might get into the vault. They might get to the actual codicil, which is a book, more or less, made of icy pages, things like that. A tall, thin volume bound in white ermine fur over the seasoned boards of white pine, and et cetera, et cetera. But the book is what Valen needs, by the way, to access the caves of hunger, which will allow her to access a tunnel to get to Yithrin. It's also got a lot of other information in it that might prove very, very useful for the player characters and other people. And there are some other loose creatures in the adventure, such as an invisible stalker. There's a chamber that actually has the codicil. Here's an image of Grimskalle and the rock, and this tiny figure is Auril. And some blessings. If one of the characters has the Auril's blessing feature, or the blessing of the Frostmaiden, these might come into play in the adventure. Overall, when Auril dies, though, one way or another, Grimskalle will collapse because her magic is keeping it constructed. Even though it was made by frost giants, they used her magic to do it. She should flee, in my opinion, one way or another, to get to Yithrin and to escape the player characters. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of a weird ending, and you're going to have to continue the campaign without the main storyline. It's kind of like the ending of Game of Thrones, where the Night King, also a frost villain, is defeated, and then there's a whole nother season that is dealing with Cersei. It's almost like that kind of situation of like, oh wait, there's this whole other 2 chapters that we have to deal with here that have not that much to do with the main storyline involving the everlasting Rime. So I, like many DMs, would recommend the player character that she escapes one way or another, heading to the east. The player characters have to deal with her one way or another. Maybe Valen suggests that she probably fled to Yithrin, and we have to go there next, basically. Now, overall, I would recommend, or I would rate chapter 5 as a 5-star out of 5. It's not a straightforward dungeon crawl. It goes some interesting directions. There's some interesting creatures. There's the tests, the 4 tests to open the vault are very interesting. There's some role playing opportunities here. The player characters can choose which way they want to do this. Dealing with the Frostmaiden is incredibly interesting, as she's not a straightforward villain. She has her own stats. There's some other side quests and locations in this chapter that the player characters could go towards, and it's a very well written chapter and well thought out, and it's one of the best chapters of this entire campaign. Now, guys, if you like these reviews and you want to see more of them, please like the video and subscribe, as I will be reviewing the final chapters, as you can see here, which are the Caves of Hunger and the Doom of Yithrin for this storyline and additional adventures.